Welcome back to the class, and we are in the 11th week, one more week to go, and for the past couple of sessions we have been discussing very specific themes related to globalization and Indian context. And in the previous classes we had a session on caste and economic situation in the globalized contemporary India, and we are continuing similar kind of discussion. And in today's class, we are going to discuss an essay written by anthropologist by name Carol Upadhyay. She is a professor at National Institute of Advanced Studies, NIAS in Bangalore. And this essay appeared in Economic and Political Weekly in 2010. And it's titled Employment Exclusion and Merit in the Indian IT Industry. So I hope you would have understood the reason why I decided to take up this particular small essay. It's a short essay, appeared in EPW, Economic and Political Weekly, because IT industry, as you know, really represents the globalized face of Indian society. And it was an industry that was became extremely popular, and became one of the most important sources of foreign revenue for India after India became liberalized. And we have Bangalore is considered to be India's own Silicon Valley, or our answer to the West. And millions of people have found their employment in Indian IT industry, whether it is in the proper software development or in the BPOs or KPOs or various other initiatives. And the reason why Carol and her team conducted a research on the questions of exclusion and the questions of merit is also to look at how such a new nascent field of employment, because it's a completely non-traditional field of employment. It's IT industry doesn't come under any of the traditional forms of employment. It's completely private. Public institution or the state has hardly any role in that. So this is an employment field that really represents the new possibilities, the global considerations, the kind of situations which are considered to be truly modern in that sense. And she begins this essay with a kind of a reflection, or the kind of a claims made by quite a lot of important people of IT industry, the CEOs and then top people of the industry, who claim that they are least bothered about caste, they are least bothered about the social background of individuals, and the only thing that really matter is the merit, the ability or the quality of the candidate. So that has been the claim, because that as we know that they would want to talk in the language of meritocracy, as if this industry is solely based on the innate abilities of the individuals, and they are least bothered about the so-called traditional kind of features or markers like caste, religion, gender, ethnicity, nation, and other things which are considered to be unmodern or more traditional, do not have any space in that. Now, given that is the kind of a claim, and this claim also gets reflected into a lot of discussions and debates about government policies on reservation, whether reservation is required or not. And quite a lot of the people who speak the language of meritocracy are in principle against the continuation of reservation in higher education institutions, especially in premier institutions like IITs and IIMs, because they think that the continuation of reservation really perpetuates or it pulls down the quality of the institution, and it actually dilutes the quality of these centers of exclusion. And there is huge amount of sociological literature, very, very interesting literature analysis and data which talk about the situation, the scenario of reservation in Indian institutions of higher education. I am not going into the details, but please take some time to read up those material, because it's very, very fascinating. So let's see what Carol has to say about this, and it's based on an ethnographic study. She collected data from software professionals in Bangalore, conducted interviews. It's a small study, and again it appeared almost 10 years back, but I believe that the study has a lot of insights even to talk about the contemporary times, and it reminds you about the continuing relevance of these social markers, your identities, your background, the kind of a cultural capital that you have, and the kind of an inequality that exists among sections of population, categories of population, not merely individual differences. So it's something very important. So the common narrative holds that employment in software industries does not depend on social connections, influence, or ascriptive status, reservations, unlike the public sector and old economy companies, but is based entirely on merit, the same point that we discussed so far. So this whole terms called as ascriptive status, whether what is something that is given to you at the time of your birth, your caste, your religion, your gender, your ethnicity, these are the things which are considered to be your ascriptive identities. And in contrast to these ascriptive identities, you also have achieved identities. And achieved identities are those which are achieved by the individual through his or her own effort. So the kind of a modern framework argues that you must be able to move out of your ascribed identities, transcend your ascribed identities, and then you will be evaluated solely on the basis of your achieved identities, the kind of education that you have, the kind of wealth that you made, the kind of position that you have created. So this is a kind of a interesting discussion in the contemporary in the conventional sociological circles. So quite a lot of the common narrative Carol argues or points out in the IT circles or the software circles is that that software industries does not depend on social connections or influence, and it's unlike the old economy companies, which are kind of private sector companies where reservation is important, people are appointed on the basis of their caste. So that is considered to be old economy, whereas software industries or a host of new things are considered to be the product of a new globalized modern era, which is least sensitive to, or which least is really kind of cares about these kind of issues. Now she draws data from a study of the IT workforce in Bangalore, and draw on other sources to show that the social profile of IT workers is largely urban, middle class, and high or middle caste. Now when the spokespersons of IT industry say that we don't really care about caste, we only look at the merit of the individual. Of course, they could be true what they are saying, that they are least bothered about the caste of the individual. But when you look at it from a sociological perspective, when you look at it from an anthropological perspective, their unwillingness to look at the caste, or their reluctance to look at the caste, results in a highly skewed kind of workforce, which are predominantly from the urban, middle class, and the high or middle castes. So their reluctance to look into the caste background simply does not result in the creation of an equal representative workforce. That's a whole irony, or that's a whole tragedy, if you want to use that word, because they are reluctant, or they are unwilling to look at it on the hope that that would provide certain kind of equality for everybody. Okay, but simply that doesn't happen, and every empirical study tells you that the IT workforce of even today, I don't think that situation has changed drastically. Even today, IT industry is predominantly from the urban centers. It is constituted by people from the middle class, and by definition, middle class is more or less high or middle caste. So in that sense, the IT workforce has a considerable overrepresentation of people from this higher caste and class. Now, she also discusses the ideology of merit that dominates the industry in the context of the recent debates on reservation. So you can always look up this particular essay for those debates. We may not go deeper into that. Now, the survey of software professionals in Bangalore found that 80% of their fathers had graduate degrees or above, while only 3 respondents out of 132 had fathers with less than SSLC level education. In addition, 56% of the respondents' mothers were graduates or above. Now, this is interesting because this question about the parents' education tells you a lot about their social, economic, and educational background. and it gives you some very clear idea about the overall socio-cultural and educational background of the candidates themselves. So, this study shows that over 80% of the IT employees whom Carol and her team interviewed had their parents as graduates, and more interestingly 56 of them were of the mothers were graduates, and there were only 4 people out of 134 whose parents had education which was less than SSLC level. So, it tells you that these IT professionals are predominantly coming from well-educated families whose parents are already graduates and must be employed. With regard to occupation, 84% of the fathers in the sample were engaged in occupations that are usually identified as middle class. They were managers or executives in public and private sector companies, 21 and 10% respectively, government officers, professionals such as doctors and university professors, and businessmen. Only 9% had fathers in lower level clerical, white collar or blue collar jobs, and 3% were from agricultural families. This is again a very striking distribution. Okay, among these 134 people whom Carol interviewed, there were only 3 people whose parents were from agriculture, and a staggering amount of 84% people had their parents educated in jobs that can be described as middle class jobs. Middle class jobs including all these things: private sector, public sector, doctors, professors, businessmen, and 9% had in lower level clerical as well as blue collar jobs. So, this tells you that the students, the generations of the people who were able to make use of the possibility of IT industry, IT boom and the resultant economic prosperity were predominantly from the already privileged background, and this is an extremely important lesson. Sociologists keep on writing about this particular ability of the already affluent class to make use of the new possibilities, because they are all prepared. They have all economic, cultural and social resources to make use of the new opportunities. Whereas for the people from the lower class, people from the lower background, it's a struggle to come up with that, and that is an extremely important point. So, 36% of the sample were born in one of the 5 metros including Bangalore. 29% were from the tier 2 towns and cities such as Mysore and Pune, and only 5% came from rural areas. However, an interesting finding is that a substantial proportion, 31%, came from tier 3 towns including district and taluk headquarters such as Tumkur, Guntur or Madurai, and smaller semi-urban towns. Again, it is on expected lines. Majority of them, almost 29 of them come from 36 of them come from 5 metropolitan cities, and then 29 come from smaller towns, and another 31 come from smaller towns, district and taluk headquarters, and there were only 5% who come from the typical rural areas. So, this also we know that how this distribution is skewed. Even among those software engineers who come from rural and semi-urban areas, closer investigation of their background usually reveals that most of them were relatively well-off agricultural families and have entered the profession after being educated in one of the many private engineering colleges located especially in the smaller towns of the southern states. So, even among those who come from small towns and villages, if you probe a bit deeper, you know that these people are coming from the well-off agricultural families who had the economic resources as well as the cultural resources to send these children, these boys must be, boys as well as girls, to nearby private engineering colleges, pay a substantially high amount of fees, and then make them employed, make them employable, and which is simply not available for quite a lot of people or parents from the lower caste and lower class. So, 88% of the respondents of the survey were found to be Hindus, while only 5% were Christians and 2% Muslims. Brahmins constituted 48% of our sample. The predominance of Brahmins is not surprising given their historical monopoly over higher education and formal sector employment, especially in South India. Again, another very well known fact that that in out of 138 people, 48 people were from Brahmins, and we know that the proportion of Brahmins in Indian population is roughly around 5%. But we have been seeing that overrepresentation of Brahmins in almost all the higher positions of both private as well as public enterprises or job opportunities, whether it's in bureaucracy or medicine, and that has a very fascinating history. That is a very fascinating history which predates that of colonialism. And there are very fascinating accounts about how Brahmins as a community were able to stay on the top of a caste hierarchy. They were the first to make use of all new opportunities, whether it was during pre-colonial period or during colonial period or during even post-colonial period. They had the kind of a cultural capital to make use of the new opportunities compared to any other castes, because it is a community. Brahmins are a community who have invested heavily in education, and they have very robust cultural capital, systems of cultural capital which values education so much, and along with their relative economic prosperity. So in comparison with, say, a middle caste or a lower caste, Brahmins as a caste group or a group of caste are always always have a kind of higher advantage, and that is very evident in this sample as well, because almost half of them come from this background, and especially given the fact that they are roughly 5% of the total population. And Muslims constitute 2%, Christians 5%. Again, very telling examples. If we include other belonging to the twice-born castes, twice-born caste, I hope you know that it refers to the Varna system. The first three Varnas, the Brahmins, Kshatriyas and Vaishyas, are considered to be the twice-born caste or the caste belonging to twice-born Varnas, because they undergo this sacred thread ceremony, which is considered to be their second birth. Employees from dominant agricultural caste, including some which are classified as other backward OBCs, constituted 15%, bringing the proportion of respondents who come from upper or dominant caste groups to 86%. So 86% of the working of the IT professionals whom Carroll studied in 2010 belong to the upper castes, and this is quite striking. Only one identified himself as from scheduled caste, and we know that the researchers would not have examined their certificates, but it's all based on self-disclosure. So only one identified himself as belonging to scheduled caste. Now, so the next part or the remaining part of the essay, Carroll examines the kind of reasons, what are the kind of processes that leads to such kind leads to the kind of formation of such kind of a workforce among ITs, among the IT sector. What are the reasons, what are the recruitment processes, what are the direct as well as indirect processes through which this kind of a filtering taking place. Okay, why that such this IT workforce ends up having say 86% coming from the topmost caste as well as class in India. So she says that examination of the recruitment practices of IT companies reveal that there are several mechanisms that have the effect of privileging candidates with a certain social background. And this is again a very fascinating field of study. There are quite a lot of literature, recent literature available connecting the social position of different communities with that of higher education, and then which establish the very robust connection, okay, between your class position, caste position and that of your educational attainment. They are able to show very specific correlation between that. The first important factor is that software companies recruit primarily engineering graduates. Studies show that the percentage of students from OBC, SC and ST categories graduating from engineering colleges and from other professional and graduate courses continue to be much lower than their percentage in the population, and that of higher caste correspondingly much higher. So again statistically evident process that it is the people from the upper castes and upper class predominantly look forward for this professional courses, including medicine and engineering, whereas students from the lower caste and class even if they aim for higher education, many times these very competitive professional courses could be quite much beyond their ability, and they end up taking other streams which are not demanding, or which are not are in so much of demand and other stuff. So the advantageous position of the upper caste in education largely flows from the historical factors and their class status. Private engineering colleges with high fees, coaching industry, etc. Again, very striking features, as well as facts that which we are all familiar with. The kind of connection with educational quality education and that of the economic position. Why that we the upper class people, why is that we don't want to send our children to government schools? Okay, we always are ready to pay huge amount of money as capitation, and also huge amount of money as annual tuition fees, and then send our children to some of the very famous private schools. But at the same time, when it comes to engineering, IITs becomes the most important attraction for everybody, and there is a huge rush for getting a seat into the IIT systems. So we know that the kind of a connection, if not IITs, all other important prestigious engineering colleges are extremely expensive in order to get a seat as capitation fees, and as also as annual tuition fees. And again, there is a huge economy revolving around the coaching industry, with again cost you lakhs of rupees, which is simply not affordable for people from the disadvantaged communities. Okay, so there is a very clear connection. I don't have the time, or we are not discussing that, but there are very interesting, fascinating work done by scholars like Satish Deshpande, Sukhdev Thorat, and a host of others who have looked at this connection between the engineering education and then the merit. There is a professor by name Ajanta Subramaniam. So she has her book on IIT systems and caste is something very important. She has done ethnographic work. She has looked into evolution of engineering education in India, and then she analyzes the kind of an inherent biases in these systems. So for the major companies, which are the largest employees, the pool of candidates is limited to the outset to the students of the best engineering colleges in India, as most of them depend on campus placement for recruitment. We know how the largest big companies function. They go for campus placements only to the metro cities, where this big, very prestigious engineering educations like institutions like IITs or NITs or some private institutions are located. So with that very approach itself, the very fact that they go for campus placement itself, the selection criteria gets a kind of a it becomes extremely skewed in the very beginning itself, and then very high cutoff marks and consistently high marks for the performers. And again, there are studies about how this background really help you in getting consistently high CGPA or consistently high marks. And there are a lot of fascinating work on the politics of examination, how examination favors certain particular kind of learning, a lot of very interesting things. Then they have interviews, both technical as well as HR interviews. And another very fascinating area is how Carol explains what exactly happens during this HR interview. Because HR interview is supposed to be an interview where your personality is evaluated, your attitude is evaluated, your communication skill is evaluated. And she very clearly argues, or has been argued by a lot of other scholars as well, the so-called personality or communication skill, these things are not kind of taught in the regular classes in colleges. Rather, they are heavily dependent upon your family background, your cultural background, and the kind of social background that you come from. So the assessment of the candidates' general appearance, demeanor, and ability to mingle during the HR interview acts effectively as an exclusionary mechanism, in that it is weighted against those who are not from middle class, cosmopolitan, and English speaking backgrounds. If you just take a moment to reflect on and to think how many of us are speaking English at your home, or how many of us are quite comfortable in conversing in English in our day-to-day life, and that percentage is minute. It's highly insignificant number. It's a minuscule of the Indian population who speak English at home and who is quite confident about speaking English. And invariably those people who do speak English at home, who are conversant with speaking English in public forum, do come from, invariably they do come from the upper sections, or they come from the privileged sections. So your command over the language, the way in which you conduct yourself, even your appearance, your color, your complexion, all these things do play a part in this whole story called as personality assessment, or your communication skills and other things. So good communication and social skills, confidence, and the right kind of personality are elements of cultural capital that students from the urban middle class and usually high caste families are most likely to possess. Same thing, the kind of your confidence, your social skills, your right kind of personality are elements of the cultural capital. We made a mention about this particular term, a term made very popular by Pierre Bourdieu, an important French sociologist, who argues about how a host of things that we consider as a part of culture are effectively valuable in certain things, and they act as capital compared to others who simply do not possess that. So this capital is not in the form of money or resources, other thing, but certain kind of traits, certain kind of say for example your ability to sing Carnatic music, your ability to enjoy Carnatic music with it all complexity, your ability to make sense of that, or your ability to make sense of, say, Western music of certain kinds. Your ability to listen to some highbrow cultural programs, certain TV shows. So these are all kind of a cultivated habits, and these cultivated habits are highly valuable in certain context. And these interviews are certain areas in which your cultural capital is something important. And one of the previous classes, I also mentioned about how being fair, being looking beautiful, looking with certain kind of body structure, how these are important traits in certain industries, and the people who simply do not adhere to these standards get eliminated very, very ruthlessly. So the merit, so on the last section, she brings our attention back to the whole question of merit argument. The merit argument ignores the social and economic factors that produce meritorious candidates in the first place, especially the continuing monopoly over a certain kind of cultural capital that is enjoyed by the middle class, which is composed mainly of upper caste due to their greater access to the best educational institutions and other processes of social closure. So how and why that higher education continued to be a stronghold of upper caste and upper class is a fascinating area, and why that the lower caste find it difficult to get adequate representation, why that especially the most sought after fields like medicine and engineering are still find an overrepresentation of students from upper castes, okay, irrespective of all these reservation policies, is a very, very contentious issue. It's a very debatable issue, and in the background of the whole debate about Mandal Commission recommendation and its later advancements, it's a very, very fascinating area, and there are quite a lot of interesting sociological works on that. And the criticism against the reservation as the murder of merit and the call for less state intervention and liberalization of education scenario. So as she says that many of these IT leaders in the IT field, they are against any such kind of extension of reservation, or they take part in the criticism of reservation, or calling it as a murder of merit. And this term murder of merit was very, very popular during the anti-Mandal Commission agitation, because many of the people who criticized the Mandal Commission recommendation, they believed that reservation is an onslaught on meritocracy. But they hardly asked the question, how is merit constituted? How is merit constructed? And why that in spite of reservation, why that there is a huge overrepresentation of upper castes in the fields of higher education. So, for instance, the industries emphasize on the need to improve primary education while laudable, also has the effect of deflecting attention away from the question of exclusionary processes in employment. It is also based on the individualist liberal assumption that all that is required is to provide every child with an education that will enable him or her to compete on an equal footing. This notion, like the ideological opposition to positive discrimination of any kind, reflects a complete denial of the unequal distribution by class and caste and other divisions such as gender and religious community of the cultural, social and economic capital required to become an IT professional in India. Very important point, because in the latter part of the essay she discusses some of the IT industries who have invested heavily in improving primary education as a part of their corporate social responsibility. But it all comes from a very liberal individualistic understanding that if you teach child well, then he or she will be able to look at to compete with others, and such a view is highly problematic, because it is incapable of looking at the structural barriers in terms of having adequate access to everybody, lack of resources to different sections of population, the way in which caste and class work in society and other things. So it's a very short essay, Carroll's essay, but simple essay. So please read it up. I decided to include that because it tries to bring in two dimensions. One is about a discussion on caste, which is supposed to be a topic that represents the traditional India, and the other one is IT workforce, which is supposed to represent the face of a new India. And when you put together, you see the continuing influence of caste in this new era of global say IT workforce and other stuff. So let us stop here and we'll come back for the next class. Thank you.